we're in Walking with Jesus, lesson 32. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. Now, we talked about that last week. We had the healing. This week, we're going to have the message that kind of goes along with the healing. And we're going to talk about how to prove who you are. Here's our little timeline. We're somewhere in Jerusalem, so it must be a feast of some sort, because that's about the only time Jesus hung around Jerusalem was during the feast. So how to prove who you are? Just who are you and who gives you the right to do what you're doing? I wonder if have you ever been asked that question?
Who are
Well,
you?
what business do you have here doing what you're doing? What are you doing here? Maybe someone's just, what are you doing? And you know, ooh, I'm in trouble now. If you're a young kid doing something you weren't supposed to be doing. By what authority do you have to be here and say this or do that? Sometimes we still get challenged. We've got people running for political office and somebody saying, well, who are you and why should we vote for you? What authority do you have to be elected and represent our country in this way or that? Jesus healed a man who had been an invalid for 38 years. And we talked about this. We kind of got the impression when he tells the man later, go your way and don't sin anymore unless something worse happened to you, that maybe this happened after he was not a child. It could have happened while he was young, could have happened after he became an adult, but whatever it was, he was at least 38 years old, if not older. We know that much. So what kind of response does he get? How dare you? What kind of response does Jesus get? How dare you go against our long-held traditions? They challenge by what authority he has to violate their religious traditions. They being the religious leaders of the Jews. And all of this because he did a kind deed on a Saturday. Now, it'd almost be like you stopped to help somebody fix their tires so that they could go to church, and you're late to church, and somebody says, well, how dare you come in here late? You know, well, I tried to help somebody so they could go to... No, you can't help people who want to go to church. You got to be here on time. Or you help save somebody's life in a car accident, and you saved somebody's life and you didn't get to church. And somebody scolds you because you didn't make it to church. Oh, how judgmental we can get sometimes.
Their Sabbath was Saturday. Huh?
Their Sabbath was Saturday, and so to do something nice for somebody on a Saturday, well, you and I would say, how compassionate of Jesus, how wonderful. They're saying, no, you violated our rules, and we don't care how nice you were to this guy. You weren't supposed to do that. Now, we're in John chapter 5, verses 19 to 47. And Jesus replies to the question about who he is. Just who are you? How dare you go around healing somebody on the Sabbath? So when you're looking to prove who you are, number one, you look at the source of authority. John chapter 5, verses 19 to 23. Jesus gave them this answer. I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. And for the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. And yes, to your amazement, he will show him even greater things than these. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. Moreover, the Father judges no one, but he has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Jesus makes the Jews an offer they'd be very wise. Oh, no, we're going to get up here first. What proof does Jesus have to offer regarding the authority to perform miracles and violate the Jewish tradition? Jesus replies to the grumbling by establishing his relationship with God. I do what my Father tells me to do. Now, he didn't necessarily say God, but you know who he's talking about by the way he phrases his conversation. He's going to establish that his authority and his power is from God. Jesus is, after all, God in the flesh. Now, they don't understand that yet. If that was all you and I knew about Jesus, we'd think, well, this guy's either weird or he's wonderful, one or the other. We'd be inclined to wonder ourselves. Children want and need their father's approval. One of the best things that you fathers can do is to talk to your children, tell them how much you love them and how much you appreciate them and approve of them. Jesus is no different. He wants to know his Father's approval is more important than the approval of all the Jews in Israel. It's natural for children to want their father's approval. Most children tend to follow in the footsteps, the personality, and the habits of the traditions established by their parents. I've looked over my life over the years, and I've noticed a few mannerisms that I got that were mannerisms. I saw my dad do the same thing. And it just seems so natural for me to do it the way Dad did it. So, yeah, we learn by what Mom and Dad model for us. How tragic for those children that don't have a father in the home to set an example for them. That's because he probably set a bad example. Here is our little map of Jerusalem. We're looking east here. Most maps, north is the top of the map, but the Jews, they make east the top of their maps. And so north is over here. Here's the Temple Mount. We come in the sheep gate right here, and right here is the pool of Bethesda, and where Jesus performed the miracle. Right down here is the fortress of Antonia, where he's going to be condemned to death. And now this wall here, question whether it existed in Jesus' day, or even this section of this wall. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I believe, is right around in here. Golgotha would be outside. Let's see now, if I got my bearings right, either in this area, or it'd be on out over here if this was a wall existed in Jesus' day. But there is, and here's one of the main gates into Jerusalem, a big gate, and it's downhill from here to here. And it's further downhill from here down into the Kidron Valley, which runs right along there. Okay, well, somewhere around there, Jesus is in town. So the rewards, here's the rewards of believing the testimony, John chapter 5, verses 24 to 30. I tell you the truth. Whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has found eternal life. Well, that's a big word to hold on to. He will not be condemned. He has crossed over from death to life. I tell you the truth. The time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to have life in himself, and he's given him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and will come out, and those who have done good will rise to live, those who have done evil will rise to be condemned. So Jesus makes the Jews an offer they would be very wise to accept. They can have eternal life if they'll just believe that he's God's Son. They can't buy it. They can't earn it. They certainly don't deserve it. Neither do the rest of us. But it's a free gift if we'll just believe that Jesus is God's Son, that he died on the cross for our sins. Now, he hasn't gotten to this death on the cross part right yet. Right now, we're just getting into the second year of ministry. So he talks to them about just believe in me. Believe in I and the Father are one. Believe I'm God's Son. Now, he can make that offer because God's given him the right, the power, and the authority to judge mankind. Therefore, the only way to heaven is through Jesus. Now, I know some people want to say there's many ways to heaven, but that's not what Jesus says. That's not what the Bible teaches. There's only one way to heaven. So we want to try to follow that example. We are all on probation through our entire life. Now, wait a minute, Glenn. You said if we believe in Jesus, we're saved. We have eternal life. Yes, that is correct. But it's a daily decision. Am I going to believe in Jesus today? Or am I going to turn my back on Jesus and say, I don't want to believe in him anymore? And so in that regard, as long as we're alive, we have the ability, the freedom, the power, if you want to call it that, to turn our back on Jesus and say, I don't want to be a part of him anymore. That's kind of scary. So what we do with Jesus determines our eternity. First, we hear about him and his teachings. Then we act on what we hear, and from there we determine our destiny. And as long as we choose to follow Jesus, we have nothing to fear. Nothing at all. And hopefully, because you're following Jesus, you'll live a life that reflects one who's following Jesus. And all those things that separated you from God in the first place will be fewer and fewer and fewer because you'll stop doing those things. Well, listen to Jesus. We'll listen to the witnesses. John 5:31-42. By myself I can do nothing, Jesus says. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. Now if I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid. There is another who testifies in my favor, and I know that his testimony about me is valid. You have sent to John, and he testified to the truth. Not that I accept human testimony, but I mention it that you may be saved. John was a lamp that burned and gave light, and you chose for a time to enjoy his light. I have a testimony weightier than that of John, for the very work that the Father has given me to finish, which I am doing, testifies that the Father has sent me. And the Father who sent me has himself testified concerning me, and you have never heard his voice, nor seen his form, nor does his word dwell in you, for you do not believe in the one whom he sent. You diligently study the Scriptures, and you think that by them you possess eternal life? These are the Scriptures that testify about me. Yet you refuse to come to me to have life, and I do not accept the praise from men, but I know you. I know that you do not have the love of God in your hearts. Wow. Those are some pretty strong words, I think. Jesus has lived among us. The writer of the book of Hebrews will later remind us that he understands our lives from our side. See, it's not God standing up there saying, oh, I've never been to earth and judging us. It's God who became man, who lives in here, and he's experienced every temptation that you and I have faced. He knows what it is like to be tempted to be selfish in many, many ways. He was tempted more than just the 3 times in the wilderness. We'll see some more of them as we go through row. Even this right here. Jesus could easily say, oh dear, all these people are looking at me, and I don't want to make any trouble, and I don't want to be teased or persecuted or ridiculed or shamed or told that what I'm doing isn't acceptable. And he could have wimped out. But he did not wimp out because he had the power to say what I'm doing is of God, and you guys are not doing what is of God. That takes a little bit of courage. One man against the whole town? One man against the whole Jewish religious hierarchy there in the Jewish capital of Jerusalem? That's a pretty bold statement to make. And they didn't have near as much regard, or they didn't think near as much about if you offended them a little too much, you might get a rock concert and get really stoned. And we'll see before Jesus gets to the cross that there's a couple of times they tried to stone him. We caught one up in Nazareth already, and he walked right through the crowd. And they couldn't touch him. We're all on probation. Jesus knows the temptations we face. I wonder if Jesus had to endure the childhood diseases that every child gets. Did he ever catch a cold? Did he ever get the mumps or the measles or the chicken pox or some of those other things that were just kind of like part of growing up?
But did they get them in those days?
I don't know what childhood diseases they had back in Jesus' day, but it makes me wonder. We'll find out when we get to heaven. But, I mean, he's your typical kid.
Yeah.
Except for he's very obedient to his parents. Even the dead will live again if they know Jesus and are seeking to follow him. Now, there are 2 eternal destinies, heaven and hell. Jesus doesn't call the abode of the condemned hell in this reference. He will mention it later. What we do about Jesus is what determines which one we will inherit. Now, he gives us 3 witnesses besides himself. Jesus cites 3 other persons or sources that testify to who he is. In the Old Testament, 3 witnesses were all that was needed to determine the truth of a matter. Likewise, a person's word was their honor, and to lie about a matter is a very serious offense. So John the Baptist is the first one that Jesus references. His purpose for living was to testify to Jesus. Remember we talked about John, the forerunner for the king? The king is coming, the king is coming, get ready, get ready. That was John's job, and he did it for about a year. Many of the Jews heard John preach in that 1 year that he was active, and so maybe not all Jews heard him preach, But a lot of Jews heard him, and a lot of others heard about him, and they regarded John as a prophet that had been sent by God. They just didn't get the message. They know who he is. They know what his message is about. John was a lamp. Jesus is the light. As good as John's testimony is, Jesus still cites an even greater authority. How about the miracles that Jesus has done? Now, we've only gone through about 1 year of Jesus' ministry, but the thing that he's done in just that 1 year, raising the widow's son from Nain, feeding, he hasn't gotten to the feeding people business yet, but here, raising the invalid, curing a guy who'd been an invalid for 38 years. And some other things that Jesus has already done are beyond what other miracle workers have been able to produce. Now there are some people, and I'm not qualified to say whether they do or don't, that claim to do miracles today, and maybe they do. God knows, I just am second guessing. And I never checked up on them to see whether those miracles are really miracles or just put on for show and fake miracles. But I don't want to say that they don't, because I don't know. There was no doubt about Jesus' miracles. Number one, as we said time and time again, the results were immediate, the results were complete, and the results were permanent. So Jesus' miracles are proof of who he is. Now God the Father is one authority that outweighs all the others. If God says it, who cares what the rest of the world says? Really, God spoke it audibly when Jesus was immersed by John the Baptist. Remember? John the Baptist probably heard that. This is my son with whom I am well pleased. And he will speak, God will speak again when Jesus is transfigured. We'll get to that in lesson 72. He also speaks to men's hearts when they hear the words of Jesus. So, how much evidence do you need? Is he speaking to you? Oh, I got way ahead of myself. There we go. Okay, are you listening to him speak to you now? Now, Moses is the final witness that Jesus references, and this is a reference to the Old Testament scriptures, of which the Jewish leaders consider themselves to be authorities. They're experts. They read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They think they know all about the 613 laws, and then they add all those other laws to them on top of that, and they don't keep them. Lie, cheat, and steal, and so forth. But the Jewish leaders are especially diligent in their studies, yet they don't see the prophecies that Jesus has already fulfilled and the one that he will soon fulfill. There's over 300 prophecies that Jesus will fulfill in his lifetime. It would be interesting. I should go look up a list and just print out a list of the references to those 300 prophecies. I'm sure somebody's already done it. Just find their list and print it out and go through them one at a time and just see how many of them. Wow, Jesus did this. Here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is. 300 times. The odds now with those odds makers are so phenomenal that one person would fulfill all 300 of those prophecies. It's just more of the power of God, knowing what's going to come and knowing what Jesus is going to do. Well, here's a picture of the streets of Jerusalem. I believe this is kind of earlier, fairly early in the morning. And so that would put the sun would be looking west here, sun to our left, or looking south. The sun be over to our left, which would put the Temple Mount just somewhere straight ahead, maybe around those buildings. But we're headed down a street. You can't really tell that you're going downhill yet. Some of the street just kind of sloped a little bit, but some of the streets were kind of flat, and then they drop about 3 to 6 inches. And they go out about another 5 or 6 feet, drop another 3 to 6 inches, another 4 or 5 feet, and I drop another 3 to 6 inches. But you can see how narrow it is through there. There's a lot of streets you would not be able to drive a car down. So, no double standards. John chapter 5, verses 43 to 47. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you'll accept him. How can you believe if you accept the praise from one another and yet make an effort to obtain praise that comes, make no effort to obtain praise that comes from the only God? But do you think I will accuse you before the Father? Your accuser is Moses, on whom your hopes are set. And if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, How are you going to believe what I have to say? Almost had to be somewhat discouraging words from Jesus.
When
Different picture?
we took the same picture that they took, showing.
Oh, okay.
showing
Good. Jesus' final appeal is for them to believe in him. It would be very damaging for Jesus to, or anyone for that matter, to lie. Now maybe you've heard the sermon. It's been around for, well, I heard it the first time when I was a little kid growing up in Kansas. Liar, lunatic, or Lord. If Jesus is a liar, he's not the Son of God. But we know that Jesus told the truth. And we can verify that Jesus told the truth. So we know he's not a liar. Well, then he's crazy. If he's crazy, he's not the Son of God. But I think we can also establish through the life and what we have here, the testimony of Jesus, he definitely was not crazy. Some people want to try to think so. They want to find some excuse to not to believe in him because of fears of things that they don't understand or know. Which means only one thing left. It means Jesus is Lord. If he says he's Lord and he's not a liar, then he's Lord. If he says he's Lord and he's a liar, then he's a lunatic. And we know that's not the case. So Jesus cannot lie. Therefore, he must tell the truth for multitudes of reasons. I've only mentioned a couple. His actions fortify the truth of his words. And the more we love him, the more we're going to want to be obedient to him. More we're going to want Jesus to come in and be a part of our lives. It was very sad that the Jewish people today only read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And there are a lot of scriptures in there that speak to Jesus, but they're not willing to read the rest of the Old Testament, and they're obviously not going to read the New Testament. In fact, they prohibit Jews from reading the New Testament. Now, every once in a while, there'll be one who will get curious, and he'll start reading and investigating and say, "Whoa, wait a minute! This is what God said was. I better follow Jesus." But generally speaking, they are very adamant. Not even reading the Psalms or the prophets. Don't touch those people. We only read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Very sad. They keep themselves in dark while they're looking for the light. And the light has shone around them, and they don't see it. Now, God's in charge of that. Well, Jesus reproves the Jews for their lack of belief because they prefer the glory of God, men, over God's approval. And we fight this battle sometimes too. Especially if an organization or a group of people that hates Christians comes against you and starts threatening you and trying to intimidate you and tell you to shut up and tell you can't speak out against them and calling you hateful names. It's funny that those who call us bigots and intolerant are being bigoted and intolerant. We could go off on a tangent on that, but we'll just go on. This is the question. What is most important in your life? Peer pressure or God's eternal acceptance? You've got an opportunity to choose. Well, our conclusion is that your integrity is the very important part of who you are. We'll talk about this again, but that is the one thing. You know, all of us want to have control of something. Usually it's control of someone. Our biggest job is just learn how to control ourselves. Oh, would we be in a much better world if people would just work as hard on controlling themselves as they work on trying to control others. But your integrity is one thing that you can control. Nobody else can take away your integrity. And if you're a person of integrity, you've got charge of that. And if you're not, that's your fault. You can't blame it on the devil made me do it or somebody else. 3 witnesses is enough to establish credibility. Jesus had at least three witnesses. By the time he gets done with his ministry, he's going to add 12 more to that. And all the other followers that weren't apostles that followed Jesus around. And on the day of Pentecost, that number is going to go to 3,000 men, plus any wives and older children that might have accepted Jesus. And the church just explodes from there. And so today we have a powerful witness to who Jesus is. Who are your witnesses? Who witnessed for you in your life that you're walking with Jesus? If you were on trial today, who would you be able to call to say, will you testify on my behalf that I'm a Christian and that I'm following Christ? Would there be enough evidence to convict you? We definitely want to say, I hope so. And we want to live our lives in such a way that there would not be any doubt. Somebody said to Zig Ziglar one time, you know, if I didn't know any better, I'd think you were a Christian. He looked at him and says, you only think I'm a Christian? I don't want you to think I'm a Christian. I want you to know I'm a Christian. I believe that Jesus died for me. And I hope that's your passion and your desire too. Well, next week we're going to deal with some more Sabbath day controversy. Not over yet. And some people are going to complain no matter what you do. How will that help us in our walk with Jesus? Well, come and see. Right now we're going to go over to our discussion page and have some discussion time.